I spent over 24 hours playing Aniimo, an ambitious new open-world monster taming game that blends creature collecting, environmental puzzles, real-time combat, and even a touch of MMO chaos, all in one surprisingly polished package. But with so many others trying to capture that same monster taming magic, how does Aniimo manage to stand out? Today I'm going to break down everything I learned during the first closed beta for this upcoming free-to-play Pokemon-like game. The things I absolutely loved about it, and the moments I wasn't as big a fan of. But I feel like the best place to start would be the question most gamers probably ask themselves when they hear it's free-to-play. Is there gacha? Not exactly how you might expect. While Aniimo does feature some gacha-like elements, the main form of monetization was definitely cosmetics, like outfits for your character and accessories to decorate your Aniimo with. There were a few creatures that you could only obtain through limited time events, and an egg hatching machine that's very reminiscent of the random pull systems you see in typical gacha games. But besides those special event forms, I was able to find and catch every single Aniimo in the wild without having to rely on the Hatchinator. There is also an energy system which does have a random factor and limits your pulls per day, but at least in my time playing, I didn't find it at all required or intrusive to the core experience of exploring the world and catching them all that I think most fans care about when playing a monster taming game. I'll be diving deeper into these gacha-like systems later on in the video, but I want to get started on the actual game. So what exactly is Aniimo? Let's get the obvious out of the way first. Aniimo definitely borrows a lot from other games. At first glance, it might look a lot more like Genshin Impact than it does Pokemon, but I found that it manages to balance aspects from both quite well. And as for Palworld, honestly, I didn't find much resemblance to it, other than the optional base building and farming mechanics, which admittedly I didn't care too much about. Though I think people calling Aniimo the next Palworld might have a lot more to do with its potential to go viral, or the worry that it might get into some trouble with the big N. But really, if I had to compare it to any other game, the closest would probably be a mix between Pokemon and Zelda. Specifically the open world Zelda games, which introduced tons of optional challenges, side quests, puzzles, and of course, shrines. The last of which Aniimo was not at all ashamed to straight up copy-paste. But honestly, one glance at any of the menus or systems in this game, and there's no denying, it looks a lot closer to a gacha game than it does Zelda. Even in the gameplay, being able to swap between characters and using their specific elemental abilities to solve puzzles and traverse the world is all very Genshin coded. So perhaps it is fair to call it the Genshin of Pokemon, which of course brings us to the inevitable Pokemon comparison. From catching creatures to filling out the Anilog and building teams with familiar stats and typings, Aniimo definitely feels most like a mashup of these two titans. But what really surprised me is how they took those familiar systems and still managed to make it feel unique. The open world is absolutely stunning, and the way puzzles and challenges are integrated into the environment feels a lot more thought out than a lot of other recent open world games. But what most stood out to me is definitely the combat, especially with the twist of getting to transform into the monsters themselves. Speaking of which, no doubt the most important part of any monster taming game is of course the monsters themselves. And this is perhaps where Aniimo most surprised me, because while I've previously hated on games like Palworld for pretty blatantly copying certain Pokemon designs, I actually found the Aniimo to be a lot more unique, though still sometimes clearly drawing inspiration from Pokemon. Overall, I found most of the designs pretty dang good, ranging from absolutely adorable to downright badass. What I didn't know I'd end up missing though were quote-unquote ugly designs. You know, the Mucks and Bruxishes of the world. No offense to those guys. Maybe they'll show up later in development, but for now, every Aniimo is clearly aiming to look either cute or cool. My favorite though was definitely this little electric dude called Besaus. Small tangent, I'm not a huge fan of the names for certain Aniimo. A lot of them are just regular words, but there's also some inconsistencies in the name, so it's possible they're not finalized. Anyway, Besaus here definitely feels more inspired by Digimon than Pokemon. But what I love the most about him is that he's music themed, with attacks that literally drop the bass on enemies. Turn up the music, turn up the bass. Oh my, you just smack his ass? Honorable mention goes to Emberpup and its evolutions. It's the very first Aniimo you catch in the game, but ended up sticking with me a lot longer than I expected. though I do wish it stayed on all fours in its final form. But what definitely added the most to my fondness for some of these creatures is perhaps Animo's most unique feature, twining. Basically the ability to become your monsters. Pokemon did start dabbling with this in the Indigo Disc DLC via the Synchro Machine, but that kind of felt like a beta test. You know, you could walk around as your Pokemon and auto battle, but that was kind of it. Animo takes this idea and absolutely mega evolves it, letting you take full control of the creatures and use their abilities for real-time combat and exploration. Some Animo can climb, others can fly or swim, or just go really fast. There are also a few niche abilities like bilateral vision, which allows you to literally see through the Animo's eyes and uncover hidden objects and secrets. And speaking of secrets, I almost forgot about digging, which I think only the crab can do, but it ended up leading me to maybe one of the most satisfying secrets I've ever discovered in any game. Oh, yo! Wait, that's sick! These unique traversal skills made exploring Animo's world definitely one of the biggest highlights for me. But the world itself being so carefully crafted and just beautiful to look at definitely helps too. So next I want to dive deeper into the world of Animo. The game takes place on this beautiful distant planet known as Idle, and graphics were easily one of the most common compliments I noticed while streaming. But more than just visuals, I was blown away by how seamlessly landmarks and points of interest are laced into the environment. Rarely did objects or buildings feel out of place, and almost everything that looked interesting actually ended up having something that made it worth exploring. For example, this random fortress that was actually a little trickier to get into in the first place ended up hiding a lot more than just an item or collectible. As a legally distinct electric fox was being held captive within, and after figuring out how to release it, you get the chance to enslave it for yourself. This is just one of many instances that really made it feel like it was worth exploring every inch of this world. Not every single puzzle or collectible slapped, but most of them were at least fun. But easily my favorite bit of exploration came from the side quests involving other Animo. Thanks to the power of twining, you'll often find wild Animo that you can speak to and get little missions from. Some of them are pretty simple, like just standing in the right spot to trigger an event, while others continue to build into larger stories, like these two rival puppies I ran into early in my journey and kept encountering as I progressed, with them getting stronger and even evolving too. This is the kind of world building I'd love to see in future open world Pokemon games. Legends Arceus did have side quests, but they basically vanished in Scarlet and Violet, along with dungeons like forest, caves, and ruins. And Animo's world isn't perfect, but I genuinely loved getting lost in it, excited to uncover what could be hidden in every single one of these little landmarks. But the more I explored, the more empty some parts of the world started to feel. That's when I realized, as big as the map in the closed beta was, it's still far from finished, with a whole region to the south grayed out and several smaller islands to the east. There's even this infinity-shaped landmass that I swear I saw in the trailer, but wasn't actually available in the beta yet, so there's definitely more content to come. My one big request though is to add NPC battles. There is PvP with other real players, but I think a few AI opponents would go a long way toward easing new players into the combat. And the few NPCs I did encounter out in the world were never even close to as interesting as the Animo you could interact with, so being able to battle them would be pretty cool. And speaking of battling, I think it's about time we finally talk about my favorite part of Animo. I absolutely loved this game's battle system. Definitely not perfect, but it is just so dang fun. Animo features real-time action battles where you can fully control the monsters or even get in on the action yourself as the human character. But I definitely found twining way more fun and even easier, since as a human you can only take 5 hits before blacking out, which completely ends the battle, whereas Animo can take quite a pummeling and only faint when defeated, so you can just keep going with the rest of your team. So to briefly break down the combat, every Animo has basic attacks, whether ranged or melee, that don't consume any sort of energy. But there's also actual skills, which are more like your traditional Pokemon moves and consume these little orbs above your HP bar that recharge when you hit basic attacks. Every Animo can have up to 2 skills equipped, though they learn way more than 2, so you have to pick and choose which ones you want to equip based on your playstyle. And then of course there's ultimate moves, which every Animo unlocks as they reach their final evolution. These moves have some insane animations and feel so satisfying to use every time. I'm not going to go too in-depth with the whole system, but I will say it feels very similar to Pokemon so far. Not the battling itself, I mean, I guess we'll have to wait and see exactly how ZA's combat is, but the stats feel quite familiar with a physical and special split. You have an equivalent to EVs and IVs, regular and special traits, which are basically like abilities, and of course a whole type chart with some small switch-ups like ice being strong against water. Oh, and there's a light type, which I think might be exclusive to the two starters in the game for now. But the most unique mechanic in the combat by far has to be Break. Every enemy has a second bar beneath their HP that depletes with damage, especially super effective hits. Once it breaks, the enemy is basically stunned, taking extra damage, and if it's catchable, becoming way easier to snag. And Break is one of the few times I felt the human character was actually useful. Well, at least once I unlocked the Bonk Hammer. Yeah, that's what I'm calling it. The human does get some utility moves too, like healing or this game's version of Dynamaxing, but when you're not twined, the AI for your partner Aniimo isn't great. They kind of just sit there taking a bunch of damage, so twining is almost always the better option, especially once you get good at dodging. So yeah, combat is very flashy, fluid, and satisfying, but of course, fighting Aniimo is only half the fun. And the other half? Well, catching them, of course. In the beta, there were just over 60 unique Aniimo. That number may sound kinda small for a monster taming veteran, but this roster hides an important secret that nearly doubles the total amount. Almost every single Aniimo has multiple forms that go way beyond just different colors. Think of them like regional variants in Pokemon. Same species, but different appearance, and oftentimes different typing depending on where or when you found them. Some are pretty drastic, like the cute and cuddly sheep Aniimo that turns into a literal thunderstorm at night, but others are closer to just recolors, like there were way too many variants of this little flower and they all just seem to be grass type. I'd say Emberpup had some of my favorite forms though, from a mountain variant that added earth to its fire type, pretty sure I saw an electric variant too that's a little more yellowish, and there was even a dark type version I found late in the game. But you know that old meme, "This isn't even my final form"? Well, Aniimo took that to heart, because there's yet another type of variant called Prismana forms. And these look absolutely sick, basically like the legendary skins of this game, except some of them even change an Aniimo's typing. I got my first two from special event eggs, but you can also earn them through regular gameplay, though it's definitely a bit of a grind. Throughout this video, you might have noticed me collecting these glowing orbs scattered around the open world. These are Lumen Ambers, the most common collectible found in Aniimo, and they can be used to upgrade this giant dandelion at the center of the world called the Branch. Once you've dumped 60 ambers into it and caught at least 80% of the Aniimo in a given region, the Branch will let you activate a special weather effect called Prismana Flow in that area, which temporarily brings out those Prismana forms in the wild. Again, it's a bit of a grind, but honestly felt pretty rewarding once I was finally able to unlock one, especially since it happened to be for what eventually became my favorite Aniimo to use in battle, this sword-wielding, Roselia-looking Ben 10 alien hybrid that I still don't know the actual name of, but looked absolutely sick in its Prismana form. And finally, you might be thinking, oh, so these are like Aniimo's version of Shinies? Well, Aniimo actually has a completely different system for that called Sparkling. Sparkling Aniimo have a rainbow shimmer around their body and of course, sparkles. But I kind of found them a little underwhelming since they don't change color like Prismana forms. A lot of them are only really noticeable at nighttime. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch a single Sparkling, so it seems my horrible shiny luck continues even in this game. Finally, I want to highlight some of the MMO elements in this game, because if you couldn't tell, this is an always online game, letting you see and interact with other players in real time, but only in specific areas like the outpost or these campfires that are usually placed right outside of alpha boss arenas. I actually think it was pretty smart only showing players in these specific areas, because the world would quickly start looking very cluttered if you could see 100 people failing the same puzzle over and over. And the spots they chose make a lot of sense. Like I mentioned, the bonfires being near bosses means you can recruit someone to help you out with them. And thankfully, they made it pretty easy to add and interact with people. I even managed to take on a boss that was way above my level by teaming up with a random player I met, and it was pretty fun. You can also trade Aniimo with others and of course do PvP battles, which I did at least try out once, but wasn't exactly a fair fight. Thankfully, the connection itself was pretty smooth. I never once struggled with connectivity except on the very last day of the beta when the servers kept crashing out. But I did see a few posts about others struggling to connect, so hopefully that all gets smoothed out by the launch. Now, I've been glazing Aniimo pretty hard so far, but of course not everything was perfectly polished. There were more than a few mechanics that just straight up confused me and some design choices that I feel could use a little fine-tuning. There are a lot of different systems in this game, and maybe this is an unk moment, but between quests, rewards, events, forms, traits, abilities, held items, skill trees, upgrading, evolving, honestly, I even struggled just figuring out how to organize my boxes because of how many different things you can click. I think the whole UI could use a little bit of clarity. It's not like you can just avoid these menus because they're pretty crucial to some of the core Aniimo experience. For example, early on, I had the choice between this magnet ability or a heal in battles. And I decided to pick the magnet because it seemed cool, not realizing it would actually be essential to solving nearly half the puzzles in the whole game. I can only imagine how confusing this must have been for players that pick the heal instead. And you can respec your skill tree at any time, but having to choose between exploration or combat skills just didn't make sense, especially when you can pretty much unlock the whole rest of the skill tree with no restrictions. The catching system can be a little bit confusing at first too, for a very similar reason. Of course, you can just walk up and bonk monsters on the head directly with your Anipod for a chance to catch them, but trying to battle and weaken them first, my partner just kept killing every dang thing I was trying to catch. And it wasn't until much later that I realized there's a skill that lets you change your Aniimo's battle mode so they stop attacking when the enemy's low on health. And this made catching a lot easier, so I felt like maybe it should have just been unlocked from the start. Despite how much fun I had during my time with Aniimo, there is still one very important aspect we have to discuss to close out my thoughts on this game. And that is, of course, the monetization. I should start off by clarifying that during the beta you couldn't actually buy anything with real money yet, and they were quite generous handing out in-game currency through events and daily quests, but you could still see where some of the gacha mechanics could show up in the actual release. I briefly went over Primogy, the game's core energy system, which you need in order to open chests that you get from defeating alphas or completing arena challenges. And these chests contain key materials and basically the game's equivalent of held items, which are crucial for PvP and other late game challenges. Now, with there being so much to do in the game that doesn't require Primogy, I never really came close to running out. Long term though, I can definitely see how Primogy starts to matter more, since the best gear and stats can only be obtained through these chests, and being limited to only 10 cracks a day could feel very restricting, and definitely like you're being nudged towards spending. Again, there are plenty other things to do in the game, from trying to catch every Aniimo and completing all the puzzles in the open world. So if you're mostly into those aspects, then you won't really ever need to worry about energy. Now, the other main form of monetization is, of course, cosmetics. And during the beta, they were very generous with handing out the premium currency you need to buy these. And you can also use some of these currencies to buy actual essential items like Anipods, including this game's equivalent of Master Balls guaranteed to catch any Aniimo, which I could see being a problem if paying players can essentially speedrun certain aspects of the game, but I wouldn't say it's like a crazy advantage. Where I do worry a little though is with this teaser they dropped on the last day of the beta. I actually never saw this specific creature while playing, so I'm not sure exactly what it could be, but this seems to be confirming that there will be some Aniimo exclusively obtained through Gacha coming in the future. My hope would be that these super rares are purely cosmetic and won't be any stronger in-game like the Prismana forms and Radiants that already exist. But again, I hadn't seen this creature before, so hopefully it's not a completely new Aniimo that you can only get by gambling essentially. I think the designs of the Aniimo are more than good enough for people to get attached and want to buy cute cosmetics and rare skins for them, so hopefully they realize they don't need to rely on FOMO, Gacha, or other pay-to-win forms of monetization, but of course, only time will tell. So with all that in mind, is Aniimo worth keeping an eye on? Absolutely. I can totally understand why some people would be hesitant. After all, with it being free to play and online only, there's always the fear that monetization could ruin the fun down the line, or the whole game gets shut down and you lose all the work and creatures you've bonded with. But at least during my time with the beta, I genuinely had a great time without spending a single dime. As a monster taming fan, I loved the sheer amount of creatures you could collect, and as a Zelda fan, I had a blast solving puzzles and being meaningfully rewarded for exploring the open world. Aniimo has a very solid foundation, and I'm really hoping they continue building on it the right way. If you made it this far into the video, you're probably at least a little interested in this game and may be wondering, when can I play it? Well, supposedly the full release won't be coming until 2026, though we don't know the exact date yet. But you can pre-register on the website to stay tuned for the release date and potentially get into the next beta. So let me know what you think of Aniimo so far, and if you'd like to see more of this game, you can check out my playthrough of the closed beta on the second channel.